am Andrew Ryan, and I'm here to ask you a question. Is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow? No, says the man in Washington, it belongs to the poor. No, says the man in the Vatican, it belongs to God. No, says the man in Moscow, it belongs to everyone. I rejected those answers. Instead, I chose something different. I chose the impossible. I chose rapture. A city where the artist would not fear the censor, where the scientist would not be bound by petty morality, where the great would not be constrained by the small. And with the sweat of your brow, rapture can become your city as well.
Hi everyone, you are listening to the Play Pouch podcast. Welcome back, Happy New Year, all those things. Before we get started on today's show, which will be a review of my co-host's more or less favourite game, which is Bioshock, please remember to give us a like, give us a subscribe, notifications, all those good things. We have recently just passed 50 subs, so we are still growing, and it's been a slow burn for the last couple of months, but we put out generally 2 shows a week, and we always generally do these kind of podcast formats. So we do thank you for anyone who has subbed us already, and if anyone there knows anybody who's into these kind of podcasts with just me and Pete just talking about games and the games industry, please fire them our way, so to speak. But yes, 2024. So we're going to be reviewing Bioshock, Pete.
Yes.
So first and foremost, let's talk about a little brief history. I played a lot of it, but not all of it. You told me about the first game, but this was many years after it came out.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say I played maybe 6 or 7 hours, and I didn't finish it, so I won't claim that I did. I stopped playing not really because I hated the game, because I didn't hate the game, but I did find the mechanics a little dated because I did it the other way around. If I would have played it when it came out, like you did, I wouldn't have had that problem. But you, on the other hand, this is right up there, isn't it, with your favourite games, as you mentioned before. So I guess the first easiest question to ask you is, how did you hear about it? Why did it get your attention before you started playing it? And what console was this on? Was this on the Xbox?
Yeah, this would have been on Xbox. And yeah, this is literally, I think, at number 1, or it's tied at number 1 of my top most favourite games of all time. And at some point in this cast, I will explain why. But I think I came across it when I saw an advert, and I think at the time there was nothing else that I wanted to play, so I thought I'll give it a go. And it just hooked me, just like hook, line and sinker, was just drawn in, and I couldn't really sort of breathe, as I couldn't sort of like tread water until I completed it, so to speak. Pun intended. So I think it was just because I saw an advert about it, and then just started playing it, and that was it, really.
System Shock and System Shock 2, I had heard about these, and they were on the PC. I think one of them did come across to the Xbox, I believe. Was it by the same makers, or did they change teams?
I'm not entirely sure. I think it's definitely a spiritual successor, but I'm not sure, to be quite honest with you. I never played System Shock or System Shock 2, but I'm assuming it's got some cluster of developers that have transitioned from that to Bioshock. Yeah, sure.
You wonder if they put any kind of Easter eggs in that obviously you wouldn't know about, nor would I, because I didn't play them either. But I remember reading in God, we're going back to these things. You might have heard of them, people, right? They were called magazines. You might have heard of these things. They were called magazines.
Yeah.
And like PC Magazine, and I remember reading about System Shock 2. And unless I'm wrong, and we're going back many years here, I think it was set in space. Unless I'm wrong about this System Shock.
I think you're right. Yeah.
So obviously it is a completely different setting from what Bioshock was, but you wonder how much stuff was carried from those older games into Bioshock. Anyone in the comments who's as old as we are, who actually played System Shock 2 or System Shock 1, that go even further back, let us know if there was any carryovers from System Shock 2 to the Bioshock, because it would be interesting to see from that perspective. But yeah, so Bioshock, so you kind of it just kind of interests you just via trailers or going that far, stuff like that.
Pretty much. I mean, I think thematically, some elements from System Shock has carried over. You know, like that isolating feeling, like Dead Space, Alien Isolation. It's a great sort of subgenre, if you like, to sort of start with. It's a good basis, and the you know, Bioshock really kind of set a benchmark in a whole load of different aspects. But the genius of setting it at the bottom of the ocean, specifically the Atlantic Ocean, was a bit genius, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very atmospheric game. I mean, we talked about we did a horror list a couple of months ago, and though I don't know if we classed it as horror per se, but it certainly was a very atmospheric game. I felt that as well for the brief time I did play it.
It is down to the end user of how they classify it. If you're, you know, not really a horror person, then it probably will be classed as a horror. But if you're used to horror games and movies, then you'd probably find it more of like a shooter with some serious moral decision making.
Yeah, we'll get onto that in a bit, because I do have something to ask you about that.
Yeah.
So I mean, it starts pretty slowly, but that's okay. To try and bring you in to build atmosphere. So how did you find? Is it a game for you, Pete? You know, were you drawn in immediately, or is it because sometimes they have to drip feed you a little bit? Do you feel that right away you were totally like, oh wow, okay, I've got to find what happens next, or was it kind of like, were you a bit kind of confused at the beginning, where it was like, well, you know, what am I meant to be doing here? Yeah, stuff like that.
Well, both basically. I mean, it was a mystery that I wanted to solve. I think is, you know, that was the big sort of grip. Why did the plane crash? Because you know, this is set in 1960, and we're playing a character called Jack who's on a plane, but then the plane crashes in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And he wakes up in the ocean, and he's reaches the surface, and when he does, he sees like this huge lighthouse, if you like, in the middle of the ocean, and it's like, what the fuck is this? So he swims over to it because he's got nowhere else to swim to. Everyone else is dead, and that's where it all kind of starts, really. And it's all really very foreboding and so it's by that time the architecture is very it's not old, but it's a couple of decades old at this point. You know, the whole Art Deco movement has probably moved on to sort of Art Nouveau style stuff, and you know, with flowing lines, whereas this was more sort of straight lines and you know, symmetrical structures and stuff like that. And it is a big cause of why I fell in love with Art Deco. Well, yeah, we'll get to that. But it's very sort of intriguing, I guess is the word to call it. And so we end up going down to the city, and the whole sort of plot starts to unravel when we arrive.
And how did you feel that and again, I only played about 6 hours, so maybe this changes, but I'm not sure that it does, but you'd have to let me know. How do you feel that they it wasn't cutscene heavy? Most of the lore you got from journals, stuff like that, you'd find lying around, from what I can remember. So how do you feel they did kind of telling you the story, unlike a lot of games obviously do nowadays, where you'd probably get a whole bunch of cutscenes, which I'm not slagging off per se, right? Because that can work. But in this game, they didn't go that route. They were kind of like, we're not going to really show you the cutscenes. We're going to leave little kind of breadcrumbs, I suppose, is a good way of describing it. But we're not going to flat out have the cutscenes which you get in a lot of other games. I mean, maybe a part of that is because the character's by himself, so the cutscene would be a little bit. But even then, sometimes they have like a narrator or something. Do you know what I mean? Or they'll do sort of flashback or something like that. But unless they do these things later on, again, like I say, I haven't played enough of it. But at the start, I found that all you'd find were these journals and little snippets of information. Does that continue throughout the whole game?
Yeah. And I feel like that is a good design choice, because if we're going to cinematics all the time or cutscenes, then you're taking us out of the story, when the story is supposed to be immersive and engrossing, and you're supposed to feel this sort of isolated feeling of being on your own, and you've only got one person to guide you, which is a character called Atlas. More on him later. But yeah, no, I loved the whole idea of having audio diaries. It, as you said, drip fed the history of the place to you, and that really was the chief reason why I found the game so fascinating, and why it actually became a beloved title for me, because it was just the whole futility of the whole effort, the whole project. And yeah, I mean, like, I'll get into it all at some point soon, but yeah, it was all just so intriguing, and it was like it was like a graphic novel. It was almost like reading a book, but a visual book. And for me, the shooting aspect, the first person shooting, was just filler to get to the next story point, and I didn't mind it.
I was about to go there and say, what genre? I mean, we've called it an atmospheric game, but that really isn't a genre. So I guess the closest thing to that would be one of those kind of they're known as like walking simulators, where you walk around and you don't do much. But obviously in Bioshock there is some elements of that, where but at its core, it's not I wouldn't class it as an RPG. You've said a first person shooter. Yeah. I think probably that's the closest it will come to. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's the closest kind of type you can give to it, but it is really fairly unique, because if it wasn't for some of the moral choices that you have to make, then this probably would have been erring on the side of a bland first-person shooter with a good story. But if it wasn't for this moral choice that you're faced with fairly early into the game, then it probably would have been like that.
Yeah. So I mean, you're given guns, but also you're given.
Well, you start off with a wrench.
That's right. Yeah, and then eventually you get better weapons, but you're also given. Remind me of what it's called, but you have to spend this resource.
Yeah, that's tying into this moral choice. But you first off, you find a wrench to defend yourself with, because the citizens that are living down in this city have gone utterly insane.
Yep,
and
I remember that.
You have to defend yourself with a wrench because you can't find anything else. And then the next thing you come across is a sort of vending machine of sorts, with something called plasmids, which enhance your molecular structure to be able to do things like telekinesis and fire spitting and whatever, lightning, and you pick up a lightning plasmid, so you inject it and you go all crazy and fall unconscious because it's your first time, or as one of the characters says, having your cherry popped. So yeah, you wake up with the ability to cast electricity from your fingers, So yeah, and then eventually you get weapons and stuff like that. With having that whole mechanic of finding ammo and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember the vending machines. What was the resource called, Pete? Remind me.
So the resource was basically called Adam and Eve. So you had Adam, which is the substance that you need to perform these tricks, if you like, these abilities, and then Eve is the source that you get it from. So I may as well mention the whole moral issue right now, which is you come across a little girl who is absolutely terrified. She's being bodyguarded by this huge sort of subaquatic type character who's in that old style under the sea sort of outfit. I've forgotten what it's called, but they're called Big Daddies, and they're faceless. They're huge and bulking, and they're very sort of unnerving, and they're looking after these little sisters. And we're not entirely sure yet why, but one of the Big Daddy that's protecting one of these sisters that you come across is killed, and the girl is left all alone, and you're given the choice to harvest her to get a lot of Adam to fuel your abilities, or a little and to save her life.
I'll intersect here with something, Pete. I remember you telling me about this game before I played it, and you were quite like, oh, go play it. I want to see how you react. And I was just like, I don't exactly know what you meant by that. And I do remember that you kept on kind of onto me saying, have you kind of seen these kind of creatures yet? I want to know what your choice is going to be. And I remember it because you were very much interested in what my choice would be, almost as if it was a kind of a character test, almost like a test, how much of a son of a bitch are you?
Yeah.
And I did what I would class, and I'm sure you do, and most people would, I would think. I did the good thing. You say that, I see a little girl in trouble, I'm not going to harvest her, right? Most people, and I'd like to think most people won't.
Yeah, you'd hope so.
You'd hope so. I remember I passed that test, I think, Pete. But no, I do remember. Sorry to interrupt, but I did remember that was a big thing when I was playing it for you. That you really wanted to know how I would deal with that decision. So that decision obviously is a massive part for you. So yeah, go on, continue.
Well, I'm glad you made that decision, mate. I feel a little bit better about our friendship. Yeah. But it was a huge thing back in 2007 when it was released. Yeah. And no, I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, audience, but I don't think we as gamers were faced with a moral choice that shocking before. And a lot of people did find it shocking because it was a horrifying decision to make. Do I sacrifice a child to get extra benefits? And as you said, you hope that people would make the right decision, but more often than not, a lot of people did make the right decision, because when it came down to it, you just feel bad. And I think a lot of people sort of faced that scenario in their head. So if it was like a real life decision, literally coming down from an outsider's point of view, you've just arrived, you wouldn't. And if you were any measure of a decent person, you wouldn't have done that. You wouldn't have harvested them. And that's why I found it so intriguing. And I think once that happened, that was it. I was just hooked, just absolutely hooked. I couldn't believe that the game actually gave me that decision. And so the whole mechanic of this Adam and Eve, driven by this moral choice of, well, do you want to sacrifice human beings, specifically little children who are innocent and have been manipulated to serve a horrifying public that have gone insane is shocking for you, and hence the reason why it's called Bioshock. So yeah, I loved that mechanic. I thought it was very, very intriguing.
I wouldn't say it's probably the first game to give you that moral decision.
Okay.
Exactly the same. I mean, I can think of. I mean, it's probably one of the first on console. I'm thinking of games like Baldur's Gate, who you could do certain things. I'm thinking of Knights of the Old Republic. These are just one I've played, folks, where I know you don't like the Star Wars games, Pete, but basically there was a choice you could make to be a good guy or bad guy, and if you go the bad guy, you end up killing most of your party members.
Right.
So that was pretty powerful stuff. That's probably why it's regarded as one of the better Star Wars games, because it did give you that choice at the end. Sorry if I'm spoiling that game, by the way, but that's like 30 years old, so
Yeah, get over it.
let me off. But no, for the most part, yeah, it certainly was not a common, nowhere near as common as it's kind of become now. But no, it was, and also maybe because of also the first person perspective. When you're playing like an RPG, it's never presented maybe quite as personally. Whereas in this game, because of the perspective and everything, I remember the scene where you pick her up, don't you?
Yeah.
You pick the girl up, and she's very much very close to you. And then, well, I didn't do the other thing, so I don't know if I actually want to know what the harvesting looks like. But I remember just she kind of squeals a little bit, and then she kind of, if I believe correctly, she kind of looks at you, doesn't she? In quite a nice way, and then.
Yeah, I mean, like, she looks like she's on crack, right? So she looks all sullen, and if you haven't obviously seen any media about this, she's about 7 or 8 years old. But yeah, so you just imagine a little girl who's just like looks gaunt and horrifying.
Yeah.
She returns to normal, and she thanks you, and then crawls back into this sort of tube, if you like, where she sort of came out from. But the person that gives you that plasmid to be able to cure them is the person that turned them into those things in the first place, and she's feeling a lot of remorse for that, and that's a depth to the story that we discover later on, of course. So, but it is just literally, it all just opens up from there, to be honest. And you carry on, and you're like, right, and you slowly realize that this guy that's guiding you around, Atlas, needs you to save his family, who are trapped in some submarine in a dock somewhere down below. And yeah, I mean, I don't really want to spoil it, but
I mean, you'd be spoiling it for me, but I've got such a backlog of games, Pete. Unless they remaster it, chances are probably won't go back. I'd be interested in a remaster. I certainly would I'd play it through, I think, with a remaster. But no, it's a review, dude. So if you feel the need to do it, then that's fine.
I'm not going to spoil it, because it is still popular today, and if people are still wanting to play it, then fine, go and play it. But there's a twist that happens sort of at the start of the third act.
Okay.
And the way it all plays out is just absolutely fantastic. So the person that designed the city, a person called Andrew Ryan, is now living down there. Now, the reason why he built the city is because he didn't believe in the governments on the surface, and he wanted to build what he called a utopia, where there was no censor, there was no sort of scientific morality issue, that you could sort of experiment and do whatever you wanted. Also with art and other types of media and stuff like that, it was all just fair game. And it was a place without any religion. He didn't like religion. He didn't want anyone to have any sort of, things like Bibles or whatever. Okay. And he assumed it was going to work out. And that's what is kind of fascinating to me. It's like, how did you believe that it was going to work? Are you insane? And I guess he was. And all the people that we meet are insane in their own way. Like, for instance, we have Steinman, we have Sander Cohen, who are just like, Steinman is like this plastic surgeon, who loses his mind and thinks that Aphrodite is speaking to him about going from making people pretty and symmetrical to sort of being like a Jackson Pollock painting, or I've forgotten what that artist's name is, but like sort of surreal art or abstract art.
Yeah.
And he wanted to do that. And then you have like Sander Cohen, who is completely in love with himself. He's like this thespian who goes just insanely overboard with his performances and ends up killing people to sort of and putting plaster on over them to sort of pose them and stuff like that. Really disturbing stuff. And then you have all those people that get caught in the crossfire, like Diane McClintock and Bridget Tenenbaum, which is a unique character because she starts off being all scientifically minded and wanting to push the boundaries and stuff, but then she grows a conscience and she regrets turning the little sisters into what they become and tries to sort of turn it back again. But there's also this sort of mythical character called Frank Fontaine, who has been plaguing that city down there with contraband. So he's been bringing in like Bibles and other stuff from the surface, and Andrew Ryan is trying to sort of like find him and take him out. And so Andrew Ryan is abandoning his morality to find and take down Frank Fontaine. So it's a story that sort of plays out over about 10 to 20 years, and people are locked down there and they're not allowed to leave. And so we arrive at a point where everything has come to a head, and it's a year later, and there's no sane people around anymore. Everyone's just gone insane. Maybe the exception is Bridget Tenenbaum and some characters from the second game. But we start to question whether we are insane, whether we have gone insane or not. And as I say, the plot twist at the end is absolutely superb. And I'm not going to spoil that. Basically,
it doesn't involve you having to kill yourself in an alternate dimension like the third game, does it?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't involve any self,
Because I know how much you liked Bioshock Infinite, Pete. And that
it was just absolutely awful. I guess the ending, literally in the first act, I was like, I swear to God, if I'm playing the antagonist as well as the protagonist, I'm going to lose my shit. And of course, yes, you are. You're playing the enemy as well as the good guy. It's like, whatever, you retards.
When it came out, when it did, specs-wise, you played it on the Xbox, obviously not PC back then. Did it run well and everything? Was there lots of bugs? When we go back a long time, and believe it or not, there was a time before Insta patches where they actually had to finish their games, So how did it release and everything? Did you have any problems with that?
Yeah, no, it was fine. No bugs. It was running at 30 frames, of course, but I wasn't bothered by any of that. Graphics were fine. The locations that we go to in the game were just so engrossing. I was exploring everywhere, and it's like being an archaeologist almost, right? If you're really passionate about the Roman civilization or the Greek civilization or the Egyptian civilization, you're going to be passionate about uncovering stuff and learning about things about a society that no longer exists. And that's kind of how I felt about it, sort of rummaging through things and finding another audio diary which would sort of add another piece to this big puzzle. about what happened.
Did it make you feel a bit like a detective? Would you say then, in that way, like you were uncovering like a murder mystery? Obviously not a murder mystery, but you know what I mean, like a
yeah. Not really. I think it was more just a sort of a discovery, like, you know, just working out what the hell happened. What was it that? How did they get these powers? And how did they just sort of lose themselves so quickly? And of course, you know, we learned that I think it's like a dock worker who ends up discovering this strange little creature like a slug, and he had like a sort of a dodgy arm or a dodgy leg that wouldn't work anymore, and the slug attached itself to that limb, and within a couple of days he was able to walk again or use his arm again. I can't remember which.
Yeah.
And Bridget Tenenbaum came across that person and took the slug and started to experiment on it, and that was it really. That was, you know, the rest is history, as they say. And they cultivated this sort of, I don't know, extract with them, this sort of essence of what the slug had, and they made what's called plasmids out of it, and people just lost their minds for the sake of making money and you know, what's the word, having like this irresistible thing. I mean, like you know, if you saw an advert for something like that, and you'd probably go for it. You'd probably be like, yeah, fucking hell.
No,
Imagine getting telekinesis.
Yeah, I mean, I think firstly, the healing properties alone would, I mean, imagine what the healing properties alone could do for humanity. Just think about it.
Yeah. It would just become so irresistible.
Yeah, and you couldn't really blame people, you know, for taking advantage of it, could you really? You couldn't really blame them.
And this is the issue, really, that they address, is that if you did come across something like this, how would society react? And this is their interpretation of how society would react. It's a very good mirror reflection on our society, actually. And I guess that's another reason why I found it so fascinating. It's just because, you know.
You said at the start that you weren't that bothered by the gameplay, and that's fair enough. Especially, but and I said slightly different. The gameplay did feel dated to me, and I struggled with it. Yeah. So at the time, what did you think of the gameplay at the time? I mean, you've kind of described it already as kind of a bit bog standard, and I think I agree with you on that. But like I say, that was me coming back from more advanced mechanics, right? That's me coming backwards. You played it for when it came out on its time. So compared to everything else, what did you have any? What were your feelings on the mechanics, like or like the moves you got and everything? Were they inventive, or did you find that it was just it's all right?
Well, I never had any complaints, like, you know, if that's what you mean. But I just thought it was okay. You know, and the reason why I stuck with it, as I said before, was because of the story, not because of the mechanics. The gameplay loop was very decent, and I feel like my reward was finding more about this out. You know, finding more about the story.
Anything about the balance of the game, enemies? Because you know we know how hard it is to balance game. Any of the enemies too hard, or did you think they got that stuff just right? That it was challenging but fair, or was it maybe too easy? But you didn't mind it was easy. How'd you feel?
No, I found it was all fair. And there were some enemies that were hard, like the big daddies were really hard. It did kind of feel like it got slightly easier towards the end. But I kind of like that sort of thing. I don't like enemies that scale with you. I've always campaigned against this sort of thing. I absolutely hate scaled enemies, because there's no internal progression feeling. If you start out the game and the enemies are really powerful, but then you start learning things and you get better and better and better, that's a decent progression feeling. And this game kind of had that. So I didn't have any complaints at all. But at the same time, it was all just sort of, like the shooting and the looting and stuff like that was present, and it's a ever occurring mechanic. But yeah, no, I didn't have any complaints.
And how did you feel about the sound? Because in these atmospheric games, sounds can be very important.
Yeah, absolutely superb, flawless, 10 out of 10. From the creaking of the girders to the water that comes rushing in if the glass has gotten weak, and it was all just very foreboding. You're at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, which is how many thousands of meters deep or whatever.
Yeah.
And so the pressure's going to be huge. So you're always like, oh my God, is something going to come crashing in?
And do they play with that? I'm assuming that they do.
Yeah, of course they do. And it's great. So you've got that pressure from the environment around you, and then you've also got the pressure from kind of being isolated and not knowing who or what you're going to come across. And the story of it as well is just like, Jesus Christ, I want to get out of here.
Right. Here's a question that I think you may struggle to answer. What did it do anything you didn't like?
The last boss was a bit of a letdown.
Okay.
I've thinking about it, it was like, well, I don't know how you could have done it any different. But so I guess that kind of had to happen. But I feel like I wanted more, which is a good thing. But I wanted more of a sort of cinematic sort of like cutscene thing. There is one, but it doesn't last too long. I wanted things wrapped up, and I just wanted more. At the end, I was just disappointed because I wanted more, and I was upset that it had come to the end, and the twist just leaves you so empty, but in a good way. It's like when you come out of a movie which is so thought-provoking that it stuns you for like the next day. Do you know what I mean? Where you're like, and you're really thinking about the moral psychology behind the things that happen down there. It's like a shock to the system, and it's like coming back from a war where you're just like, Jesus Christ. And the delusion that people adopted, the whole different sort of varieties of false ego and stuff like that, and the depths of depravity and the limits of the psychology of human beings, that feeling that you're in an isolated place so you can sort of do whatever you want and not feel bad, but then eventually your conscience takes over and just destroys you. It was an excellent study in civilization and
without
people.
spoiling it, because I know you said you didn't want to. So the second game, which obviously this is not a review of, but just very quickly, the second game, did that continue the story on directly with the same character and everything, or did it just say, no, we're going to give you a brand new character and we're going to assume you've played the first game, or is it like, we're not going to mention the first game stuff, we're just going to new story?
Yeah, well, it's set after. It's with a different character, because the character that you play in the first one goes off and whatever. So we go back under the ocean to the city, and we play a character called Subject Delta, and he's a big daddy. He was the first big daddy, and it was a sort of, he was the prototype, so they hadn't really sort of ironed out all the kinks. Yeah. So he has some sort of slither of humanity left in him, and he has a daughter that he remembers called Sophia Lamb. Is it Sophia Lamb or Eleanor Lamb? One of the two. And he he hears her, so he decides to go off and find her because he's been left for dead, and he has to sort of face a whole sort of new character, a series of characters which sort of question his existence. There's one person who doesn't want him to be alive and stuff like that, and we're introduced to the first big sister, and
okay, there's big sisters, is there now in that one?
Well, there weren't many, obviously, but by that point, because it's set sort of like, I don't know, maybe 10 years later.
Right.
And, the whole city's kind of gotten slightly worse and things have sort of broken down a bit more. And I did really like the second one. And there was a continuation of the story. So they mention the original story with all the same characters that we knew, but it gives us more information, basically.
Well, we've discussed most things. Is there anything else? We'll give you a review in a sec, Pete, but have I left out anything? Is there anything else you want to say about it? Because obviously I know how much it means to you. So,
I think this is the perfect example of how to have a fantastic narrative that is intriguing, shocking, the right amount of each, and so engrossing as well. And it was a perfect decision to have audio diaries as opposed to sort of like big blocks of text or cutscenes, because you're going across, and it's a fairly linear game. And when you come across an audio diary, you stop what you're doing and you listen to it, because you're interested. And whilst the audio diary is playing, you're hearing all the sounds around you, and you're really immersed. And it was a great decision to keep it as first person, because that just brings that extra level of being drawn in. So it was a perfect exercise in how to do a game decently within the genre that it's in. And I guess if you're going to pigeonhole it, it would be sort of like a horror thriller, first-person shooter, basically. And if anyone is interested in narrative-driven first-person shooter games, I would definitely try Bioshock 1 and 2. Not the third one, because it's a completely different setting and completely different story, although they go back to the story in DLCs at the end of the third one. But I would suggest that people go back and play this. I really hope that there's a remaster for this, for the first two. I've heard there should be. I've heard rumors that there's a fourth one on the way. There hasn't been any announcements. I think it's been like sort of 3 years. I've also heard that Netflix has bought the video rights for it, and they announced a few years ago that they were going to do something. There hasn't been any news since. So,
Pete, that might be a good thing, mate. You saw what it did to Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, no, I was happy that it was Netflix that bought it and not, Amazon.
Not Amazon, yeah.
Fucking Disney. So I think if anyone's going to do it justice, it will be Netflix. And I think the perfect person to do it is that chap who did Pan's Labyrinth, and he helped out with Death Stranding as well. I've forgotten his bloody name now.
They should probably get somebody who's actually played it and is passionate about it, for sure, I think, anyway, to do these things.
Yeah. But no, that's kind of it, really. It's just a superb example, and it set a lot of benchmarks in terms of having really heavy moral choices in video games. And
well, it got really good ratings at the time. I can't remember if it won Game of the Years. There was no Game of the Year awards back then, I don't think. But I know that it was highly touted when it came out. So I know it reviewed really well, and was generally considered. I don't think I heard anyone ever really say anything that bad about it. So
no, definitely not.
Does it still hold up story-wise? Yes. Why would it not?
Yeah.
I would say to you, from my perspective, and I guess other people's, if you are used to certain mechanics and maybe UI and ease of life stuff in games, you're going to be taken back a little bit because it is a game of its time. That goes with a lot of other kind of nostalgia games, but that is a factor that you should consider.
Yeah.
I'm not going to leave a review. I have not played enough of it that I feel it's fair. But Pete, what's the score then? I think I might already know, but you tell me what the score is.
Well, it's a 10 out of 10. It's perfect, despite the one or two nitpicky flaws, as I mentioned before, like the end boss and the lack of a sort of a decent end cutscene, a decent length cutscene. Yeah, just literally superb. Every aspect of it was brilliant. So yeah, 10 out of 10 for me.
10 out of 10. So Pete, one of Pete's most favourite games, and I think a lot of people probably, especially the older people watching this who played it when it came out, I'd imagine they've probably given it similar ratings as well.
Yeah.
But that'll do it for this podcast, this review of Bioshock. You can get the Bioshock collection pretty cheaply. It's on Game Pass as well, Pete, I believe, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's in Game Pass. You can get
Epic Games. The Epic Games launcher gave away the Bioshock collection a couple of years ago over Christmas. So if you know, I know a lot of people don't like the Epic Games Store, but do install it because they do give away some decent games. Like literally, they gave away Plague Tale Requiem. I think it was yesterday, so I grabbed that. So yeah, no, it's a good way of getting some decent free games. Also, the Tomb Raider series, they just gave that away free as well. So
It's good.
Definitely, it's very cheap now. I think it's like 15-20 quid. So definitely pick it up.
You can certainly get the whole collection. I think Pete's right, for about 15. Pretty much on every console. I don't know if it's on the Switch, but I know it's on the PlayStation and the Xbox and PCs. But okay then, folks, we'll leave it there. Thanks for joining us. Please remember to leave a like, subscribe if you can, and the notifications. As I said, we're still quite a young channel. Not even at the 6-month mark, I think, yet, Pete. So we just passed 50. Next stop is 100. So please sub if you can, or direct somebody who's into podcasts like these where we talk about games, older games, new games. We're pretty flexible. And
we're really brutally honest. We don't really care that much about hurting people's feelings. I mean, like we're over 40, and we've seen it all when it comes to video games. So we're not going to beat around the bush. And if you are of a similar age, then please do sub to us because it would help.
Yep. Anyway, that'll be it, Pete. Thank you for joining me, and everyone have a good day. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
See you next time.